Hi, this is your host Saptin Bhartia, and welcome to another episode of TFR Insights. And today we have with us once again Moolchandani, co-founder and CTO of Accurics. First of all, it's great to have you back on the show. In the last few weeks, we have heard a lot of not so great things about cloud native or Kubernetes security. We have been talking about it security for a while, that now security is no longer an afterthought and things like that. But as all these technologies are moving into production from evaluation, that's when we have to get worried about every bug, every CV out there. And we just saw two cases there. So first of all, what I would like to know from you, how serious are these flaws? Should users be worried about them, or we should just learn from our old lamp or Windows server world that, hey, yeah, they will keep coming in, don't worry about them?
So both the issues are, there are two, vulnerabilities that have come out in recent. One is still to come out completely. One of them is CVE 2020-8569, and the other one, which kind of is more, I would say, useful for the attackers and bad for the defenders, is CV 2020-8554. So both these issues, 8554 is very recent. 8569 is a bit old now, but both of them provide different types of attacker capabilities. You see, now when we talk about vulnerabilities, there was a time when the whole narrative and perspective was focused on the defense. Now, the whole narrative, even from the defense side, is to understand what offensive capabilities these vulnerabilities are providing to the attackers. Both of them provide pretty significant capabilities to the attackers. One provides, 8569 provides loss of service capabilities. So attackers can cause denial of service and loss of service on your Kubernetes clusters. And the other one, which is more latest, provides post-exploitation and persistence capability for the attackers. Once they get into your cluster, if this vulnerability exists, which is 8554, they will be able to persist and intercept network traffic, which is outbound and inbound to your cluster, which is a pretty significant attacker capability. So vulnerabilities are pretty serious.
Yeah, and these are all remote, attacks. They don't. I mean, of course, there is no local machine when you talk about cloud native, but no user interaction is needed. While these are kind of serious from that perspective, but considering the whole environment and architect of cloud native world, where we're not talking about local machine access to local, because sometimes we say, there is vulnerability, but attacker needs access to physical machine, but here that is not the case. And as you were saying, even in this case of security, should we also kind of play the game of cat and mouse, where we are chasing back actors versus staying? I mean, of course, you cannot stay ahead, because you have to be right 100% of the time. They have to be right only one time. That's how security works, bad guys. So talk about, first of all, what does these do? Of course, this is not the new CV. There have been so many earlier, so this is not a new trend suddenly we're seeing. But seriousness of these. Number two is, how is this going to change the way we look at cloud native Kubernetes security? And then we also saw the SolarWind thing, which is totally unrelated, but the thing is that it's getting a lot of attention now.
Yep. So Swapnil, in the Kubernetes world, yes, everything is cloud native, everything is ephemeral, everything is immutable. Ephemeral means something that's not going to live for a long amount of time, right? The technologies are designed to remain ephemeral. And therefore, ephemeral technologies bring advantages, rip and replace strategies, immutable strategies, but they can also, present security challenges as well. Now, one statement that, has become very popular in community, almost every Kubernetes expert is using this phrase, that Kubernetes is the new operating system for internet and for cloud. Now, Kubernetes has to live up to this statement as well now. That means that if it's really effectively providing a lot of compute and network management and distributed architecture related capabilities, like how operating system were providing at one given point of time. They still support the underlying layers, but that means that Kubernetes will go through its own journey of security maturity. Imagine what level of security we had in operating systems many years ago, and what is the level of security we have today within them, baked into them. It's the same journey that Kubernetes is going to go through. This is going to be a maturity curve. We will see a lot of security issues that's going to pop up in next few years, and then there will be a time when a lot of stability will be observed as well. A lot of new capabilities are going to be also provided. From the today's scenario point of view, there are multiple strategies that are available to the defenders to address these scenarios, these critical vulnerabilities that are coming out. You are right, there will be hundreds of vulnerabilities that are going to come out. They are never going to reduce, right? So one of the strategies that we like to promote, and we are observing communities liking it, is to reduce the cost of remediation as much as you can. Once your cost of remediation is low, there is enough incentive and encouragement available for the DevOps teams and for the Kubernetes teams to remediate. You remediate fast, you eliminate opportunities for the attackers, right? So how do you reduce the cost of remediation? So cost of remediation has its own cost ladder. It is minimum when you are doing it in the design time, and it increases a notch further when you're doing it in pre-deployment stage, and then it is highest when you are doing it in the runtime, right? That's where a lot of these issues, if they can be detected in design time, that's what the community should be doing, and they should be adopting that strategy. Good thing is, because the cloud native technologies are built with ephemeral and immutability in mind, almost all cloud native technologies, because they have to support these two paradigms, they have to be able to support programmability. And programmability means that they have to support infrastructure as code. So that means there is opportunity for you to detect all these critical issues ahead of time. So as an example, both these critical vulnerabilities that have come out, TerraScan, which is our open source offering, was able to put together security detection policies which can be used to detect these vulnerabilities even before the clusters are built and deployed, right in your infrastructure as code. So ISE and new cloud native technologies are also presenting opportunity to the defenders to detect these issues before runtime, because there's so much of capability available.
Right. You earlier mentioned that Kubernetes is seen as an operating system. I would just like to push back a little bit, just gently on that one. Is if we are using public cloud, then yes, of course, I don't have to worry about the underneath infrastructure that Amazon or Google have to. But even if they have to worry, whenever I talk to Linux doorbells or Greg, they say the Linux of the cloud is still Linux. You are running Kubernetes on top of some operating system. So you still need the holistic approach because Kubernetes is just one layer. There is so much underneath that layer as well. So if you are on-prem, you cannot, hey, as long as my workload is secure, I'm safe. That is not the case. You still need the full zero trust and all those kind of things. You have to have a holistic approach. But let's just focus on cloud native for a while here. You mentioned TerraScan, and also you mentioned the approach has to change. Can you talk about that? What are we have talked about it in our previous discussions, but what are some of, I would not ask you to provide with a playbook or best practices, but still, what are the core components, like policies can be there, zero trust can be there, that do play a big role in this? Because when we look at attackers, there are two things. Number was their incentive is high to compromise. I mean, somebody may want to, depending on what is their motive. Somebody just want visibility, somebody is doing for a state sponsor attack, somebody wants to steal something. It depends. But if we can kind of reduce their incentive, number one. Number two is that also make it harder for them, that they have to just put way too much effort to make compromise, so it's not even worth it. So is there any playbook or some tips how you can do that. So just to add more layers like onion, which of course, there's nothing like fully secure environment, but still add more layers there.
Yeah. So cloud native world, there are, it is layered. It's pretty layered. The entire cloud native stack is pretty layered. If you look into how the typical, containerized applications when they're deployed, there are multiple layers which are possible for the end users to adopt. Uh, Say, for example, if you want to deploy a containerized application on AWS, you have multiple choices available. As a bottom layer, you can just use AWS's compute, and then on top of it, you can deploy your own Kubernetes, cluster, and then you can deploy images, container images on top of it. Or you can go ahead and use a full abstract layer like Fargate. You can deploy it on top of it, or you can, select a managed Kubernetes service from AWS, Azure, GCP, such as EKS, AKS, and GKE, and deploy it on top of it. So there are multiple layers, right? Now, these layers have their own control planes. They have to be addressed from security point of view also in layers. So how do you do that? Well, number one, issue which is been so much spoken about, the community now very well realizes that 80% of the security issues emerge out of lack of cyber hygiene. And cyber hygiene simply means best practices, hardening, following the benchmarks, following everything that is available to the community through public, standards and compliance, literature. So, as an example, CIS benchmarks. At minimum, if you follow that, you are strengthening quite a bit of your environment. The low hanging fruits are going to be eliminated. There are multiple ways to address it. You can do CIS benchmarks at the design time, in CI/CD, or even in runtime. Plenty of open source options are available for community to take advantage of. Terrascan is one such option, which allows you to do CIS benchmarks testing ahead of life cycle. And then once you have achieved a level in your cyber hygiene, ensure that you are identifying your crown jewels very well. Because the point that you were raising, how should we lower the incentive for the attackers, right? The incentive for the attackers is when they know there are crown jewels available and they know the path to that. So before the attackers get to know what are your crown jewels, you as an organization should know what are your crown jewels, and then focus upon building a fortified approach towards it. You can do defense in depth around your crown jewels. You don't have to protect all the regions of your network. So visibility into your crown jewels, it's a very important factor. I think that's one thing so first, I always recommend to do cyber hygiene. Sometimes it's number one or number two, your asset classification, asset visibility. That is the foundation still in security space since 3 decades. Everybody's talking about asset classification is very important. Something that you don't know, you can't protect. So you need to have visibility into that. And then number three is you identify your threat model and then design your security controls according to that. There's no point deploying security controls which don't align with your threat model. It's like, you've got gold nuggets, sitting in one room in your home, but you're putting the lock somewhere else, right? You need to identify your threat model and then design the controls accordingly. That is going to cover you for the remaining 20%. But as you said, any motivated attacker, anybody who has the intent, opportunity, and capability is a threat for you, right? If you can also determine there's very advanced adversary emulation techniques and simulation techniques that one has to do, which is for some other day for us to discuss. But for all the average organizations, these three strategies should work really well for them to be defended and protected against 80 to 90% of adversaries, which are scavenger type adversaries, which are on internet, right? Targeted adversary protection is a different space altogether. It's a different conversation altogether.
You mentioned that the example of gold nuggets, and when we talk about visibility, there is something called a street lamp effect. There is a joke also. I'm sure you're aware of. I don't want to repeat that, but you're scanning what you know, right? You're not looking at the places. So how to kind of eliminate or avoid the street lamp effect? Because when you're talking about having visibility, when you talk about looking at assessment, you should have a holistic approach, because you may not be looking at the areas where the attacker is looking at.
That is true. It's a hard problem to solve. Let's first start with that admission, because otherwise we can't improve. And one of the approaches that I'm observing CISO community is taking up is they're simply going after something which is called as this has become a term in at least the community where I'm interacting, KSD, key system dashboard. What that means is that you identify your key systems which are generating revenue for you. So if you are a banking organization, if you are an insurance organization, there must be 30, 40 apps which you are giving away to the users, which basically is generating revenue for you. Identify those key systems. Once you have identified them, now do the trickle down effect on them. So let's say you have identified this is my key application, figure out this application runs on what all infrastructure. So whether it runs in a particular cluster, particular VPC, particular region, or it is scattered around, it has DR systems, work downwards from identification of your key system, which is revenue generating, because you want to protect at the end of the day your revenue generating assets first, right? Once you build this model, this is what allows you to then create a architecture diagram which becomes the basis for you to do your initial threat model, identify threats, and then build your monitoring systems accordingly to monitor your threat model that you are coming up with. But the key to that is to first begin with understanding what are your key systems. Once you've had the coverage for it, that's where you can then start doing some lateral adjustments, and you start looking into areas which are other than the key systems. Therefore, security programs, security management is a maturity cycle, cannot be done in one day, and requires a lot of experience both at the leadership level and at the execution level. A lot of buy-in is needed, budgeting is needed. Security is not cheap. Security is expensive, both from time and cost point of view, and requires a lot of effort.
Security becomes even more expensive once you're compromised. I look at it, security is like airbag or parachute, right? You don't need it all the time, but when you need it, you wish that you had one. I also want to, talk about policy as code. What is its importance, not only just for Kubernetes, but also cloud native in general?
So policy as code is the most effective and cost-effective way of achieving, cyber hygiene and hardening with, capabilities where you not only can identify your security gaps, but you get full opportunity to fix them with the help of remediation as code as well. Policy as code enables you to do remediation as code, right? So when you are codifying your policies to identify the gaps and deviations, the same codification of policy, the reverse of that is remediation as code, right? So if you have codified a policy, you know what is that code which is going to remediate that. So it's the most effective way and cost effective as well, because you get to do policy as code in the design time as well as in the code time or development time, right? Before you have built your infrastructure, before you have deployed your applications. And that's the strength of this whole paradigm. Now, one of the projects from CNCF, OPA, Open Policy Agent, has kind of become a de facto standard in cloud native world to do policy as code. It supports a language called as Rego, very powerful language, very Go-ish kind of a language, has a power of Go behind it. You can write policies, custom policies of any type across various different technology stacks. It was designed for Kubernetes specifically, but it can be extended to any other layer as well. So Terrascan uses OPA internally, and Terrascan has gone ahead and expanded the OPA capabilities in such a way that it can be used not only in Kubernetes, but also in serverless containers, and also at your bottom layer, which is your cloud provider layer as well.
Awesome. Thanks for explaining that. Now, we are almost at the end of 2020, and if I remember, I think a few years ago there was attack, and when all these companies are busy sending out, the packages that we are ordering, and suddenly you really don't want to be the guy who has to lose sleep at night because of some compromise. So, can you talk about what are the areas that developers still need to focus on, which sometimes they overlook, so that they really look? We cannot keep up. The bugs will be there. Bugs will become vulnerabilities. That is something we don't have control over. But as you were explaining earlier, so can you just talk about what are the areas that are overlooked that they should just pay attention to, especially we are working from home, everybody's working remotely, everybody's doing everything digitally today on the internet. So talk about that.
Yeah. So, you know, developers. If I speak about, there are multiple types of developers now, right? I mean, for our discussion's sake, we can pick up an example of infrastructure developers, right? Developers who are putting together infrastructure to support all type of services that we are engaged with. Talk about stock services, Robinhood, right? Delivery services, DoorDash. Everything is running on cloud today, right? So when we are deploying such environments, which kind of have become lifeline now, including COVID vaccine analysis is happening on cloud. It's not happening on laptops, anymore, or desktops anymore. So such environments have become societal lifeline now, and they are very critical. What one aspect that I believe which gets very overlooked, which is very easy to implement, is configuration management. So a lot of times developers, and it's not their fault, their job is to deliver, and that's where the lack of configuration testing can sometimes can have a snowball effect. Simple configuration can protect you against a very critical vulnerability, right? And that's where I see that community is required to bring more and more supportive tools for developers, and enable developers to use the tools within their workflow, which can enable them to do configuration management, detection of misconfigurations at an early stage itself, so that and it has to be contextualized. Problem with development teams is that if you tell them you need to go and make these 4 changes, they need to know why. Now, that why part has become very important from security point of view. If you are asking a developer to enable or disable a certain configuration, you have to provide enough context, and that's when you will be able to see adoption happening. So config management, I believe, is one area which can really go a long way in terms of protection, which is getting overlooked due to lack of integrations in the developer life cycles. That's where a lot of improvement is required from community.
Yeah, because if you look at it, vulnerabilities that you have no control over, vulnerabilities, bugs, and misconfiguration, these are the 2 main factors that lead to that. And so yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And thanks for sharing those playbooks, those ideas, those suggestions to them. Thanks for taking time out today and talk about not only these 2 vulnerabilities in general, but in general, the cloud native and Kubernetes security. And I look forward to talk to you again as usual. So once again, thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Swapnil.